Are you taping, baby? Baby, are you taping? Oh, yeah. Hey, 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 hey. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wake up, America. We are in the building this Saturday. It's Mac and Free, but our names are not important. And we're going to kind of dig into something that may be a little serious today, Free. And I know it's I know everybody's hearts are heavy. I wish I could say we, but that would be untrue, because I have not watched a video of George Floyd being murdered by a white police officer while being filmed on a city street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But the country is in civil unrest right now. As you can see, there are plenty of plenty of people who are protesting, and there are some peaceful marches going on, but we've had riots in both Atlanta and Minneapolis. And Free, I know you just told me very recently that you passed by in Greensboro, North Carolina, where we're from, a peaceful protest that's taking place in downtown. Talk to me about your feelings on, I don't know, first let me start by asking a question. Have you seen the George Floyd video? Yeah. So tell me what that did for you and how it's affected you after watching that video.
Well, it's sad to say, because it's been so common, you kind of become numb to like the emotion. Well, not say emotion, but you just get angry because you're like, with all that's going on that we've seen recently, that it's still done in broad daylight and it's being filmed, and there's no regard for life. So right now it's just, you understand why everyone is angry, because we continue to see this stuff happening, yet it's film, we have more access, but it's like nobody regards that, which leads to where we start to think like these individuals feel like they have a system that will back them and that they can get away with it. Absolutely. You know, it's because it's just so blatant nowadays. It's just a shame, and just with the with Ahmaud Arbery, the sister in Louisville, it's just, it amazes me that people just have no regard for life in these situations, man. So it's troubling. It's troubling.
I think what's interesting is we were talking about this in a production meeting last night, and I wanted to save a lot of how I felt about this particular situation until today, because I wanted to be able to try to explain it to the world and our listeners and viewers and the people who rocking with us. And thank you. You've increased the viewership for the people and listenership for the people who are listening by about 150% for us. So we appreciate that. But in the midst of the civil unrest that we see, you talked about riots and protests, and you were alluding to how there's riots are very different than peaceful protests. Yes. And I started to go into it and talk about how they are one and the same. And let me take a little bit of time to express that, because we're going to try to dig through a lot of this and even go into the history of civil unrest as it pertains to racially charged motivations, because that's been going on for a very long time, which is what you've alluded to, and it's not new. Spike Lee was alluding to this in Do the Right Thing, and at that point, which was in 1989, it had been going on for decades at that point. So we have to be careful with what we say in regards to this matter. But what I want to get to in particular is talking about how riots and protests are one and the same. Because the reason I say they're one and the same is because what you have you have two sides on the same coin. So it's almost as if you have an offense and a defense. And they're on the same team. They're all playing for the same reasons, but you have two different sides that are going to have to play a different way. And there's two different types of angry, which is the reason why protests and riots are one and the same. You have your angry crew that's saying, hey, look, we need to be able to get on their nerves and we need to change systematic issues by learning how to play the game better than they can play it. And those are your protesters. And then you have those that are saying, bump it, we're kicking over the chessboard. We're not going to learn how to play chess in this particular situation. And the one thing I don't like about riots is it changes the narrative. But even at the same token for which I say I don't like riots, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't understand them. Because at the same time, when people are fed up, sometimes they just don't know what else to do. And when something like this has happened over and over and over again, and we have situation after situation, and we go Trayvon Martin, you have the McDuffies down in Miami during the Miami riots in 1980. You have Rodney King. You have Michael Brown. You have, I already said Trayvon Martin. You have Tamir Rice. You have, what's the kid's name out in Fruitvale Station? What was that kid's name, Free? Out in Oakland, California.
Yeah, I forgot.
Oscar Grant.
Yeah.
And the list, Eric Garner, and the list keeps going on. There was a kid who was just shot in Graham, North Carolina, and this is falling under the radar, unfortunately. But there was a kid who ran out of his home trying to elude police, and one of the police officers shot and killed that kid, that young black male, in Graham, North Carolina, just Thursday. So the list continues to pile on and pile on and pile on and pile on. And you have two different types of fed up. And one fed up is let's get in the streets and let's mobilize the best way that we can. Then the other fed up is let's tear up every single thing that we see as we move through these streets. And one changes the narrative for the other, but at the same time, I understand them both. And that's where I am with it. It's unfortunate. And even when you look at civil unrest history in America, you see riot after riot after riot for the same reason, but then you see very little change systematically because the narrative gets changed, and then we're talking about the actions of the fed up and not the actions systematically that affected the system from the protesters who were fed up and were able to get people in line. So what do you think we should do? Because I'm gonna be honest, I don't have any answers in regards to it other than we have to try to do everything that we can to be safe in the meantime. But the only answer or advice that I have for anybody is at this point in time, we got to mobilize. And I'm gonna give you the floor for a second, but mobilization is the first step for me.
Well, that's true. We do need to mobilize, but I want to say this, and I'm glad we pointed out the difference or the language used in this, because saying riot, others would say revolt, some would say uprising. Now, with that being said, I don't want to see people get harmed, and I hope it doesn't escalate to mass injuries.
Right.
Because, you just don't want to see that. But when you look at the landscape,
unfortunately, we've lost lives already. So
we have, but you don't want to get worse because it looks like it's going to grow and grab and keep growing. But you look at the anger and just looking. I was looking at mappingpoliceviolence.org, and you just look at, and this just goes back to a 2015 report, and it shows like police killed at least 104 unarmed black people in 2015. And it said 1 in 3 black people killed by police in 2015 were identified as unarmed. And it said the number was probably higher due to underreporting.
Absolutely.
So then you see 13 of the 104 cases, only 13 of those cases of the 104 incidents were police charged. So you see the anger because you see a system that is perpetuating this situation. And even though there was a third degree manslaughter charge, it's not enough for everybody, especially in that same city where you saw the Somalian cop, Muhammad, who got 12 and a half years for a shooting incident with an unarmed woman. But I want to say this, and then I'll yield the floor.
Okay.
One of Troops, the former group Troop, had a song, Audacity, and they said in that song, they said, "What kind of picture are you trying to paint? It ain't no Mona Lisa because you're running out of paint." And the reason I said that is because America has painted a picture to where this type of behavior is been accepted. When you look at the violence that we've had in this nation with assassination of leaders, presidents, political leaders, just everyday violence in the streets, these police killings, it's painted a picture to where it's almost become a norm or acceptable to some sorts with our nation. And when you see this, there's going to come a point where it blends and makes for that perfect storm. We're at a time where this group is pinned against that group, and there's animosity everywhere you turn.
Right.
We've been in the crisis of this pandemic where people have been confined and restricted. And it just all circles into a perfect storm. So you see where the opening for something like this could come to play. So like you said, I mean, I understand, because if you look at the history of America, a nation that's been in wars for over 200 years of its 240 plus years of existence, you just understand it's the nature of this country. We look at, and getting back to that picture, and I'll close with that, but I said all that to say this. When we look at these situations with so many unarmed blacks, black males in particular, the U.S. has also decided to paint a picture that certain individuals are more, or certain communities or certain areas of economic status or socioeconomic status are more criminalized than others. And what I mean is, you look at the low socioeconomic communities, which are mostly black and brown, and we associate, in America, we've been brought to the point where we associate drugs, drug abuse, guns, violence. But when you look at it, there are no gun manufacturers in these communities. There's no manufacturing factories. These people in these communities don't own boats and planes to transport the drugs and everything.
Right.
So when you look at that, you see how America has painted that picture to criminalize certain groups of people, certain people of socioeconomic status. So it's very easy to criminalize people in these positions. And sometimes you often hear people say, well, they were doing something wrong, and we just criminalize it, and we don't analyze